Me and Pac went in the studio and did a song together. And then them little dudes.
Outlaws.
Yeah. Outlaws. They came, like, as soon as we got there, they came up to Pac talking about, yo, Lauryn Hill dissed you, Mobb Deep dissed you, this and that, and so then Pac went in the studio and started writing about, I think it might have been that.
Caught up in all the hype. And if Tupac came back from the dead now to hear this interview, he would agree. They got caught up.
KRS-One is finally setting the record straight about Big Daddy Kane and Tupac's relationship. And it turns out, most of what people thought they knew about these two legends isn't true at all. According to KRS, Kane and Pac were never enemies. In fact, they respected each other on a real level. So why has history made it seem like they were on opposite sides? Simple. Suge Knight. Everyone knows Suge loves stirring the pot, controlling the narrative, and making sure his artists pick sides. The whole East Coast versus West Coast drama wasn't just beef, it was business. It sold records, filled magazines, and kept the cameras on him and his label. But here's the twist. Big Daddy Kane wasn't interested in playing that game. As for Tupac, he got caught in the whirlwind whether he wanted to or not. KRS hinted that any so-called tension between Kane and Pac wasn't real. It was manipulation. Industry politics tried to pit them against each other when, behind closed doors, the two actually had mutual respect. Kane was even approached by Death Row to sign on, but he turned it down. That single decision dragged him into a storyline he never asked to be a part of. And what people don't know is that behind the scenes, Kane and Pac shared conversations, ideas, and even potential collabs that never saw the light of day.
Pac is a lyricist. See what I'm saying? It's just that he's not one of those lyrical MCs that spit stuff, but his stuff is, he spit deep lyrics that touch your soul.
Back in the mid-90s, Suge was busy expanding his empire with Death Row East, a bold move to take over the East Coast market. And who better to front that push than one of Brooklyn's most respected lyricists, Big Daddy Kane? Kane himself has admitted that he was offered a $100,000 advance and a deal that could have changed everything. But Kane stood firm. He wasn't interested in playing the industry's game, no matter how much money was on the table. Kane flat out turned the offer down, saying he wasn't about to be a part of that scene. That decision instantly positioned him as a neutral figure in the middle of the growing East Coast versus West Coast tensions.
Didn't Eric B try to sign you to Death Row East at one point?
Yeah.
What happened with that?
He called and said, Suge trying to, build a Death Row East, man. I think it might be a good look for you. So I went out there, like when I walked in, these two big ass Rockwallers came, and then Suge, he comes out the back. They come running around, sniffing around me and stuff, sits down with his cigar, sits his cigar down and does this. And both the dogs ran and sat down next to him. So I'm like, okay, this one of them meetings. He said, well, what you want? A $400,000 advance. Why you ain't just simply say $500,000? Man, you Big Daddy Kane, man. I can't see myself signing you for less than $1 million. I gotta give you $1 million. He said, 'cause you already a household name. But then he was like, well, yo, look, I don't know how you doing financially, but if you want, I can just give you $100K in the morning. That's when I knew it was time to go. I was like, you just gonna give me $100,000 with no agreement? Nah, I was like, I'll let you know tomorrow. And then I went and switched my flight to like a 6 a.m. joint, got the...
Kane wasn't naive. He knew something about that $100K advance smelled off. Nobody in the industry hands out that kind of bread without expecting control in return. As he put it, signing with Death Row East would have been like dealing with the devil. And he wasn't about to sell out. But this wasn't just about Kane's personal choices. His rejection of Suge's offer was also him refusing to be a pawn in a manufactured rivalry with Tupac. Despite Suge's schemes to pit the two legends against each other, Kane and Pac actually had a surprisingly respectful bond. KRS-One has repeated in interviews that Kane never had beef with Pac. In fact, he said multiple times that Kane and Pac had more in common than most rappers of their time. Sadly, though, Pac couldn't fully escape the East versus West hype. It pulled him in deeper than he ever wanted.
Bottom line is that they got caught up in all the hype. And if Tupac came back from the dead now to hear this interview, he would agree. They got caught up in the hype. And Public Enemy prophesies, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. You know, and they got caught up. Biggie, they all got caught up, and it's a shame because we ain't supposed to go out like that.
Kane, on the other hand, recognized Pac's talent early on. He always defended him from critics who tried to claim Pac wasn't a lyricist. Kane stood firm on that point. He knew Pac had something special.
Right? You know, you being a respected lyricist, how you feel about the people that push the narrative and say that Tupac, he wasn't a lyricist?
Okay, but hold up. Tupac is a lyricist. See what I'm saying? It's just that he's not one of those lyrical MCs that spit stuff, but his stuff is, he spit deep lyrics that touch your soul. So I do consider Tupac a lyricist. You know what I'm saying? Even though his stuff is about substance, I do consider him a lyricist, because it's like this here. You have to be lyrical to touch someone's soul, to make someone feel like, yo, I don't know this man, but he knows my pain. You see what I'm saying? So I do consider Tupac a lyricist. I would never.
And then there's the almost mythical collab, an unreleased track they recorded together, Wherever You Are. It never officially dropped, but those who've heard it swear it proves Pac could hold his own bar for bar with a living legend like Kane. But their connection went even deeper than music. Both Kane and Pac shared an interest in the 5% Nation, also known as the Nation of Gods and Earths. This Harlem-born movement from the 1960s was built on the belief that black people are the original people of the planet, and that true power comes from self-knowledge and awareness. Kane had been influenced by it since the 1980s, and it shows in his rhymes. He wove references to supreme mathematics and the supreme alphabet into his lyrics, things that hit different if you knew the background. Even if you didn't, his rhymes always felt sharper and more layered. Tracks like Wrath of Kane carry the fingerprints of that influence, showing how deeply it shaped his artistry. Now, when it comes to Tupac, his link to the 5% Nation was a little different than Kane's. Pac was never formally initiated, but he was exposed to the teachings back in his Baltimore days. And through his mother, Afeni Shakur, a proud former Black Panther, he soaked up revolutionary ideas from an early age. You can hear it all over his work. Themes of empowerment, self-knowledge, and resistance against oppression ran through his interviews, his poetry, and of course, his lyrics. So even though Kane and Pac stood on opposite coasts, and the industry kept trying to make them enemies, the truth is, they shared a foundation of similar philosophies. That mutual worldview gave them respect for each other long before fans ever realized. But here's where it gets really interesting. Suge Knight wasn't just a record label boss. He was a master at controlling the story. Death Row Records was dominating, and Suge knew better than anyone that nothing sold records like drama. The East Coast versus West Coast rivalry was his golden ticket, and Suge didn't mind manufacturing beef if it meant keeping cameras flashing and headlines rolling. His move with Kane was calculated. By offering him that Death Row East deal, Suge wasn't just dangling money. He was trying to drag one of Brooklyn's most respected icons into the West Coast story. Kane refusing the offer didn't just save him from the label, it also placed him in a strange space. Suddenly, he was the neutral figure in a war where everyone else had to choose sides. And in Suge's world, even neutrality became its own kind of statement.
You can't say it's an East Coast, West Coast rivalry, number one. People were starting to say it's an East Coast, West Coast rivalry because it was people that's trying to make money. It was true people trying to make careers. It was people trying to get famous. It was people hustling other people out of money on the East Coast. You don't have no team. You need us. We from the East Coast. Pay us X amount of dollars for protection. And some of these idiots was doing it. For us, how we looked at it is, we looked at it as we representing the West Coast, but we representing the ghetto.
Pac, on the other hand, didn't have the luxury of staying out of the fight. Once he signed with Death Row, he became Suge's crown jewel, the face of the label. That meant the East Coast versus West Coast feud wasn't just around him. It became part of his identity in the media. Magazines, TV, radio, they all pushed the narrative hard. And while Pac was naturally fiery and outspoken, a lot of those rivalries with East Coast rappers weren't as real as they looked. Many were amplified or even directly manufactured by the label's interests. And here's the thing, KRS-One knew exactly what was going on. That's why he never entertained the industry's games and why he constantly called out how the music business exploits black artists. He saw straight through the smoke and mirrors and he refused to play along.
This place, this institution can never side with, come under, understand the exploitation of our culture. Never will you ever see me standing in the environment where our culture is being exploited. Or if you do see me there, the next moment this thing's gonna fall. I'm there to bring this shit down. If you see me in a situation like that, you should say, yo, watch out. Something's about to happen. Turn your cameras on. Something's about to go down. Why is Chris here? Why is he here? Something's about to, he gonna say some shit right now that is gonna,
But Suge Knight wasn't the only one pushing the East Coast versus West Coast narrative. The machine was much bigger than just death row. In the 90s, the record industry had layers of influence. Executives, A and R reps, media outlets, all of them with financial motives to keep conflict alive. Album sales skyrocketed when rappers were beefing. Magazine covers sold out when drama was plastered on the front page. TV ratings jumped when they could air stories about rivalries. And in many cases, artists were nudged, pressured, or even edited into looking like they were throwing shots at each other. Sometimes their words were taken out of context. Other times, interviews were chopped up to manufacture tension. What fans saw on the surface wasn't always the reality. Kane and Tupac are perfect examples. Both men were skilled lyricists, respected across the board, and grounded in personal philosophies that leaned more toward knowledge than chaos. Their actual one-on-one interactions? Respectful. No animosity, no bitterness. But the industry's narrative flipped it into something completely different, because conflict sells better than peace. Suge and his circle understood this and leaned in heavy, weaponizing fear, loyalty, and street credibility to keep control of both the artist and the story. And while Death Row had the most visibility and Suge was the loudest voice, let's not pretend East Coast labels like Bad Boy and other executives weren't guilty too. They played their part, feeding the fire from their side. And here's the reality. Tupac, with his fiery temper and willingness to speak his mind, became the perfect weapon for the industry's strategy. Kane, on the other hand, was measured and cautious. He refused to let himself be used as a pawn, but even that refusal didn't protect him, because the media twisted his neutrality into its own storyline. Suddenly, just staying out of the feud was spun into Kane picking a side.
It's a problem with Death Row and Suge Knight and Snoop and Tupac against me. It's a war. That's the most craziest thing I ever heard of in my life. I get no stripes for slapping a female. I don't hit women. Or I'm a prayer on the week. So how I'm a war with a guy who ain't no man? I don't have nothing against nobody out there who doing their thing. You doing your thing, you do it. But don't do an interview and say, well, the biggest war is between Death Row and my company. Death Row on a whole nother level. If they had a problem with us, we don't have a problem with nobody. Everybody know where we at 24/7. Either at the studio or at the office. If there's an event going on, we're gonna be the first ones in the front row having fun. At the Super Bowl, we're gonna be there betting and cheering. So we're not the one high. There's a lot of people who make up like stories to try to get themselves famous. I get themselves some yellow power. That's the wrong way to do it. If you're gonna do it right. If you're gonna be with Death Row,
And while fans obsessed over imaginary rivalries, the real action was happening behind closed doors. Executives were signing contracts, cutting backroom deals, taking percentages from collaborations, and pushing new albums while the spotlight stayed on the drama. The East Coast versus West Coast beef sold far more than records. It sold hype, attention, and influence. Suge and other power players knew that controlling perception was just as valuable, if not more profitable, than controlling the music itself.
East Coast, West Coast thing, it just got out of control. Dudes is getting killed, and I felt responsible. But I couldn't stop it.
We ain't mad at the whole spot in New York, we just mad at certain people. I got this new project coming out along with some other brothers called One Nation, and it's like an East Coast, West Coast collaboration to kill this whole new vibe everybody want to be on about it being a war between the East Coast and the West Coast.
Right.
It's really just a problem with two rappers.
And the East Coast, West Coast thing is something that the journalists and people are making up just to get paid off it so it can drag out and everybody can have albums. They're perpetuating it so it could be drama.
When it all go down, don't look at me and Biggie and be like, why is there a big East Coast, West Coast war when you're shooting this to 300 homes, 300 countries, telling them about an East Coast, West Coast war that they would never know exists. So that's where information becomes a problem. We both need to exercise greater restraint.
Damn.
And that's exactly why the story of Kane and Tupac matters so much. It proves that hip-hop history, the way we're told it, is not always the full truth. Executives like Suge and the larger industry behind him profited off the chaos, while the artists themselves were the ones trapped in the middle, their names, reputations, and sometimes even their lives turned into tools of marketing. So when we look back at the 90s, it's clear the East Coast versus West Coast war wasn't really about two coasts or two camps. It was a scripted drama, manufactured for profit, with Suge as one of the lead directors. And the tragedy is that Pac didn't fit neatly into that script, which is why his real connections, like the mutual respect he shared with Kane, rarely make the headlines. Well, what do you think? Was the East versus West beef really an industry illusion? And how different might things have been if Pac and Kane's genuine bond had been given the spotlight instead of the drama? Drop your thoughts below, and I'll catch you in the next video.